Aviation has long stood as a symbol of human ingenuity, uniting nations, accelerating progress, and essentially shrinking the world. But with such great heights comes devastating risks. Today, we examine 4 extraordinary aviation incidents, each with its own complex chain of events, fateful human decisions, and lasting impacts. From a Cold War fighter jet plummeting from the sky during a peaceful airshow in Michigan, to the suspicious and politically charged demise of Wagner Mercenary Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, or the supersonic crash that signaled the beginning of the end for Concorde, and the deadliest single aircraft accident in history over the skies of Japan. These crashes span continents, aircraft types, and decades, but they all expose some fragile balance between flight and failure, between survival and catastrophe. By exploring what went wrong and what was learned, we uncover not just the stories of the machines and the people aboard them, but the crucial lessons that continue to shape the future of aviation safety. When things go wrong in the skies, the consequences are often sudden, tragic, and far-reaching. On August 13, 2023, spectators at the Thunder over Michigan Airshow, hosted by the Yankee Air Museum at Willow Run Airport in Ypsilanti, Michigan, were horrified when a Soviet-era Mikoyan-Gurevich, or MiG-23 UB fighter jet, lost control and crashed into a parking lot at the Waverly-on-the-Lake apartments. The jet narrowly missed residential buildings and exploded into a fireball upon impact, destroying several unoccupied vehicles. Remarkably, both the pilot and passenger ejected just moments before the crash and parachuted safely to the ground. They were transported to the hospital as a precaution and were later reported to have miraculously sustained only minor injuries, likely as a result of the jarringly high-speed ejection. The MiG-23 was making a low-altitude bank to the left when the incident occurred, and according to a preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, the ejection was initiated by the back seat passenger whilst the pilot was still attempting to troubleshoot an engine problem. The pilot, Stan Filer, a retired US naval aviator from Texas, recounted that shortly after takeoff, he noticed the afterburner had failed to ignite and the MiG's airspeed began to drop rapidly. As he tried to maintain lift and maneuver the aircraft back towards the runway, Filer informed the passenger that he was not ready to eject, but despite this, the ejection seat fired, shooting both crew from the aircraft. The rear passenger later told investigators that after the aircraft began to decelerate, he and the pilot had a brief exchange about the severity of the situation and concluded they might not have enough altitude to return and land safely on the airstrip. He could not confirm whether he pulled the ejection handle, but believed he might have, caught up in the urgency of the situation. Video footage and eyewitness accounts from the ground captured 2 distinct flashes as the pilot and passenger seats were ejected. The MiG-23 UB involved was the only privately flown aircraft of its kind in the United States and was owned by Filer, who collects and operates a fleet of Soviet-era fighter jets. Introduced into service in 1970, and with just under 10 different countries still harnessing them within their armed forces today, the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-23 is a hallmark of Cold War aviation, known for its variable sweep wings, advanced radar technology, and beyond visual range missile capability. It served as a potent symbol of Soviet air power. Originally designed for frontline fighter bomber roles should the Cold War have turned hot, over 5,000 were manufactured in a myriad of variants, yet it is now a very rare presence at airshows due to its piloting complexity and limited availability. The incident prompted an investigation by the NTSB to determine the cause and assess the safety implications of operating historic military aircraft in civilian contexts, particularly given the recent global spate of such accidents. The 2015 Shoreham Airshow incident, 2019 Boeing B-7 Flying Fortress crash, and 2022 mid-air collision in Dallas, to name but a select few. Whilst the survival of both the MiG's aircrew is fortunate, the apparent miscommunication or disagreement between pilot and passenger could have ended in far greater tragedy. It's even more remarkable that no one on the ground was injured, particularly given the residential crash site. On the 25th of July 2000, Air France Flight 5490, a Concorde supersonic passenger jet, was scheduled to fly from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport to John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, but during takeoff, the aircraft ran over a metal strip that had fallen from a Continental Airlines DC-10 that had departed shortly beforehand. Titanium alloy debris punctured the Concorde's front right tyre, which burst as the aircraft attained speeds of around 185 miles per hour, 300 kilometers per hour. High-speed shrapnel from the exploded tyre peppered the underside of the left wing with devastating force, rupturing the number 5 fuel tank and resulting in a crippling fuel leak. The fuel was ignited, likely by electrical arcing or contact with white-hot engine fragments, engulfing the aircraft in horrific flames. Simultaneously, segments of the landing gear were shattered, preventing their retraction, just as the aircraft suffered a loss of thrust in its left engines, number 1s and 2. Despite the severe damage, the aircraft briefly managed to become airborne. However, the combination of asymmetric thrust, increased drag from the extended landing gear, and fire-damaged flight control systems ultimately made the Concorde impossible to control. Just 2 minutes after becoming airborne, Flight 4590 slammed into the Hotelissimo Hotel in Gonesse, a suburb of northeast Paris. All 109 souls on board, 100 passengers and 9 crew members, were tragically killed, and at the crash site, 4 individuals in the hotel also lost their lives, while several others sustained life-changing injuries. In the stunned aftermath, the Concorde's entire British-French fleet was grounded, and after extensive investigations and safety modifications, amongst them reinforced fuel tanks, Kevlar lining, burst-resistant tyres, and improved electrical shielding, the aircraft returned to service on the 7th of November 2001. However, this reprieve was short-lived. Commercial Concorde operations ceased permanently in October 2003, marking the end of the once vaunted supersonic airline era. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Boeing 747 SR Flight 123 departed Tokyo's Haneda Airport en route to Osaka Itami Airport with 524 people on board, composed of 509 passengers and 15 crew. Terrifyingly, less than 15 minutes later, only 4 passengers remained alive, marking the deadliest single aircraft accident in the whole of aviation history, and the worst aviation disaster to befall Japan. At 6:24 p.m, approximately 12 minutes after takeoff and whilst cruising near Sagami Bay, south of Kanagawa Prefecture, the aircraft suffered a catastrophic structural failure due to the rupture of its rear pressure bulkhead, resulting in a sudden explosive decompression that destroyed part of the tail section, detached the vertical stabilizer, and severed all 4 hydraulic control systems. The Boeing was rendered virtually uncontrollable. Despite the near complete loss of flight controls, the aircrew managed to keep the airliner aloft for over 30 minutes by skillfully manipulating engine thrust. Reporting their emergency to Tokyo Area Control Center, air traffic controllers attempted to guide the aircraft back toward Haneda Airport for a crash landing, but the Boeing ultimately banked into a spiraling, out-of-control descent. At 6:56 p.m, Japan Airlines Flight 123 plowed into Mount Takamagahara in Ueno, Gunma Prefecture. An eerie photograph taken by an observer on the ground just minutes before the crash confirmed the absence of the vertical stabilizer. The subsequent air crash investigation, led by the Japan Aircraft Accident Investigation Commission (JAAIC), determined that the disaster was the result of a botched repair job performed by Boeing in 1978 following a tail strike incident that left 25 passengers injured, 2 seriously. Instead of using a single continuous splice plate, as required, engineers used 2 separate pieces that were joined by a single row of rivets, significantly compromising structural integrity. After years of pressurization cycles, estimated to be around 18,800 and clocking more than 25,000 flight hours, the bulkhead simply gave in. Boeing accepted full responsibility for the improper repair, yet Japan Airlines faced equally harsh criticism, leading to a major overhaul of its maintenance and safety protocols. The Japan Self-Defense Forces were also critical for delays in initiating their rescue operations. Investigators later concluded that perhaps 20 to 50 passengers may have survived the initial crash, but later died from their injuries whilst cruelly awaiting help. On August 23, 2023, an Embraer Legacy 600 business jet took off from Sheremetyevo International Airport in Russia's capital, Moscow, en route to St. Petersburg. The jet was carrying 10 individuals, including several key figures of the infamous Wagner Group, a Russian state-funded private military company. The company's founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin, co-founder and leader of military operations, Dmitry Yutkin, and head of security and foreign logistics, Valery Chekalov, were amongst the passengers, alongside 2 Wagner Group veterans, 2 of Prigozhin's personal bodyguards, and the Legacy's flight crew, pilot, co-pilot, and flight attendant. The aircraft, Romeo Alpha 02795, departed Sheremetyevo at 1500 UTC, and by 1511 had reached an altitude of approximately 28,000 feet, 8,500 meters, where it then began making erratic altitude changes, at one point briefly descending 1,500 feet and then climbing rapidly to 29,300 feet, 8,900 meters. Finally, it plummeted sharply to 19,725 feet, 6,012 meters. Horrified witnesses on the ground recorded the plane's final moments in a steep, uncontrolled descent, trailing white smoke, and then reported that the aircraft appeared to have lost one wing and part of its tail before it crashed in Kuzenkino in Tver Oblast. The debris field was extensive, with the left wing found approximately 3 kilometers 2 miles from the main crash site, and victims were initially unidentifiable due to the severity of the wreckage, leading investigators to suspect catastrophic in-flight structural failure. Initial theory suggested either the detonation of an explosive device within the fuselage or an impact of a surface-to-air missile, SAM. Whilst US intelligence later stated their own investigations found there was no indication that the aircraft had been shot down by an SAM, they concluded it was likely brought down by a controlled explosion or other form of onboard sabotage. Prigozhin had once been a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, following the Wagner Group's prominent role in Russia's invasion of Ukraine earlier that year, Prigozhin became an outspoken critic of the Russian Ministry of Defense, boldly accusing it of woefully mismanaging the war and illicitly misleading the public. On June 23, 2003, exactly 2 months before the crash, Prigozhin had even led a short-lived and ultimately failed armed rebellion against the Russian state, and he appeared in videos acknowledging that threats to his life were real and ongoing just days before the fatal flight. Shortly after the crash, Putin wildly claimed that the crash may have resulted from the Wagner founder's consumption of alcohol and drugs, citing the discovery of 5 kilograms of cocaine in Prigozhin's office. He also stated that fragments of a hand grenade were found amongst the victims' remains, again asserting that no evidence of an external missile strike had been found. However, these claims have not been independently verified and are viewed by many international observers as skepticism. Many believe that the crash of Yevgeny Prigozhin's jet was not a tragic accident, but rather a calculated and deliberate act of silencing, an assassination masked as an aviation disaster. The suspicions surrounding the event are deeply rooted in the political and military tensions that preceded it. Prigozhin, once a close ally of Putin and a dominant figure due to his leadership of the Wagner Group, but his accusations of corruption, incompetence, and betrayal may be struck too close to home. Furthermore, the deaths of not just Prigozhin, but also his top military commander, Dmitry Yudkin, and other senior Wagner associates suggest a broader effort to decapitate the group's leadership. For many analysts and observers, the crash appeared to be too precise, too convenient, and too timely to be purely coincidental. In a country where political opponents have historically died under mysterious circumstances, from poisonings and drownings to improbable falls from windows, the downing of Prigozhin's jet fits an uncannily familiar pattern.